I was a director of software engineering, and I was running a software team. When one fine day, a business VP walked into my office and told me that our customer loved our software, but really was complaining there were too many bugs. And this VP really put me on the spot. He said, look, what are you guys working on? Are you working on these bugs? And how much time are you spending on it? And the best answer I could give him was, I don't know right now, let me get back to you. And I really thought about that for a while, and I got frustrated that I couldn't answer that kind of question very quickly. And it's not about just, the software specifics of bugs and features. It's really about having complete and total visibility into what your team is doing in a very quantifiable way. So after that meeting, I spent a lot of time, a lot of manual effort, digging through data, putting it in Excel, looking at spreadsheets, emailing the team, calling lots of meetings. So really a flurry of activity. And that's when I just realized, look, there has to be a better way. And that's really what today is all about. Today, we're really going to cover KPIs and dashboards with a real focus on operating technical teams. So by way of introduction, my name is Paul Johnson, and I'm a partner at Esalen Research.
And I'm Augustine LeBron, also a partner at Esalen Research. And today we're going to provide you with a step-by-step guide to transforming all of the data that you're already collecting about your operations in your business and turning it into useful, actionable KPIs and dashboards. And for those of you who don't know what KPIs are key performance indicators. These are the numbers that you use in order to look at your business and run it better. And so we're going to talk about this and a lot of other things over the next half hour or so.
All right, thanks, Augustine. And to really make this as actionable and as relatable as possible, we're actually going to do this live. I'm going to make a dashboard right in front of you, and hopefully that'll drive the conversation. So, to continue our story, what I brought up here is a piece of software called Power BI. It's from Microsoft. It's one of the tools that we like very much for dashboarding. Of course, there are other tools, and we can talk about that later if you're interested. But we're going to use Power BI for this demo. So imagine, again, I'm a software manager, and I want to make a dashboard for my team, see what my team is looking at. Now, the first thing to notice here on the right-hand side is we've got multiple tables of data. And this is actually an important value that tools like Power BI bring, which is you're able to bring in data tables from multiple different sources. So it doesn't matter if these tables came from, let's say, just a spreadsheet, whether they came from a database or from any kind of a tool that you could imagine. The point is all of the data is brought into one place. And as we're going to see in the next 20 minutes, that's really what unleashes your KPIs, is the ability to bring in different data sources and then make relations between those sources. So let's get into it. But I might start with something really simple in my example case. I might start with, let's look at time versus the number of bugs. Okay, so for my hypothetical team, you could see a simple table. But of course, it's going to look, much more appealing if we make this into a column chart. So we're gonna go ahead and let's just see if we can make this a little bigger. Right. So already this, starts to be interesting. I can look at the number of bugs the team is working on a week-to-week basis. So if you're looking at this, you might be tempted to sort of jump in and immediately get a team executing on something just with something as simple as this. You might say, hey team, let's go after it. Let's try to really work more or less on bugs and really drive the number of bugs in our product down to zero. But this is where we want to introduce one of our first principles, and this is this principle of balance that we'll talk more about. And the idea is, hey, like if you have a team, a software team, and you're only working on bugs, and you only track bugs, then you might sacrifice other things. So really what I want to do is look at more than just the bugs. So in this particular example, I have another column in my table called kind of work. So if I look at kind of work, and what I'm going to do is, instead of looking at bugs, look at the changes. And one of the things I'm going to do here is change the colors. So, I think, bad is red. So we've got in this example some bad bugs, and bad bugs are just ones that, let's say, have really bad product impact. A normal bug maybe is black, and let's say like a new feature is nice and green. Okay, so now what we've got is some good balance, and this is really an important concept.
Yeah, the idea here in our first principle here is you want to design your KPIs very carefully, because we all know you make what you measure. And if you work hard enough at improving what you do measure, you'll get really good at that. But you'll get kind of bad at the other stuff that you still care about, but maybe you're not measuring. And this isn't some new novel idea. Economists have known about this for a long time. It's called Goodhart's Law. And the idea of Goodhart's Law is that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. It sort of detaches from the things you actually care about. And so the question is, well, how do we fight this tendency? And as Paul said, the thing you need to do is look for balance. In his case, if you track bugs, well, then you need to track features too, something that counterbalances that. So yeah, good KPIs, they come in pairs. I mean, sometimes triplets. And I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've talked to a client who had good intentions and actually had designed some pretty good KPIs, but they're still not improving. And it was all down to the interaction between the KPIs. What are you trading off and how? And we're going to talk more about this a little bit later, but it's a really important first principle.
That's right. And so let's go back to Power BI and let's continue the story. So now we have, as Augustine said, what we would call a balanced metric and visual that we can look at. But there's a new thing we need to layer in here. And if you notice, what we're measuring here is a simple count, right? So we're just looking at the instances that the team is working on one thing or another. And as we all know, not all work is created equal. Some work might just consist of one item, one bug, let's say, but it might take a very long time. Another feature, same thing. So just counting them isn't telling us the story. Really, what we want to get to is something more like cost. So in this data set, what I can do is say that instead of value, I can do cost. And you can see immediately how the graph changed. So things that maybe looked big beforehand now got smaller, and vice versa. And you can see our y-axis is in dollars. Now, why I picked dollars is important. Let's talk a little bit more about that principle.
Right. So the big picture idea here is you want everything that you care about to be transformed into dollars. And the idea of dollarizing everything is a simple but very powerful idea. I actually learned it when I was a trader on Wall Street, because, I mean, in that world, it's kind of in your face, right? The only way to make good decisions is to compare things in what matters, and that's dollars. But the thing is, it's actually exactly the same principle in tech. It's just that it's not quite as obvious. As engineers, we're used to thinking in terms of other metrics like schedule or feature rates, test coverage, whatever. But in the end, they all have to cash out into what matters for any business, and that's dollars. And when you do that as a technical team, all sorts of avenues open up to improve communication with the rest of the business that maybe isn't as technically minded. If you start talking in the same terms, better decisions start to result.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So to my original story, if I had a business VP asking how much are we spending on bugs, I could actually give them an answer in dollars. That becomes a common language. So we're on a good path here. We've got our dashboard that's balanced. We've dollarized our dashboard, but there's still some missing elements here. The next thing we're really going to talk about is this idea of goal-oriented visuals and goal-oriented KPIs. And so what I mean by that is by just looking at this chart right here, it's not quite enough of a call to action to our team. And so I'm going to try to improve that. So to improve that, this is where we really start to introduce the concept of multiple related data. So what I've done is I had a different database, and this database was a list of components of my project. And it's in this table here. So what I'm going to do to leverage that is I'm going to add a visual called a tree map. I like this visual very much because it does allow for comparisons. And let me just do some real-time adjustment of the visuals. Okay, it's looking pretty good. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say I want to group by component name. And in terms of the details, well, that would be work type. our kind of work, excuse me. And then the values, of course, we talked about dollarized. We want to look at cost. Okay, wow, this is starting to get interesting. This is a very colorful diagram, and you could see all these different component names. What's interesting here, graphically at least, is that each box is actually scaled to represent the amount of work. So you could see like this peripherals box, we're doing a lot of work there, and it's further subdivided into the kind of work, which is interesting: features, bugs, and bad bugs. So this is I would say a good visual in that it's ripe for exploration. It's you can ask lots of questions, but I still want to sharpen the pencil even more and make it more actionable. And one of the things that I would notice with this visual is I'm not really leveraging the colors. I mean, it is colorful. It's a nice rainbow here, but the colors don't really encode any information. And let's see if we can do something about that. So for a second here, I'm going to remove this kind of work. And I'm going to go into Power BI, and I'm going to go into the advanced colors option. And what this allows me to do is color based on a different field. So I've created a field called health score. Here it is. So what is health score? It's really the ratio of features to bugs, right? So let's say we want to color based on the average health score. And the way I've designed this metric, the lower is actually a better number. So we'll make that green, and then we'll make the high value red. And let's see what that gives us. Wow. Okay, so you can see the impact that had. Right away, we've got this firmware component that is glowing a bright red. Right, so this is really like where things get interesting, because we can now target this module. And to make this an even sort of maybe the cherry on top is I sometimes it's nice to see the actual numbers. So we're going to add something called a multi-row card, and it's going to be again the kind of work and the cost. And so this is sort of the totals. But if I want to zoom in on my red module, I can see that I'm actually spending nearly $3 million. And look, the time graph also reflects where that money and time was spent. And you can contrast it with something that looks a little more green. Let's look at peripherals. You could see peripherals, sure, there were some bugs, but really the feature work dominated for this module. So I think the call to action is very clear here. We are spending money on bugs, but we're spending a lot of it on one particular module. Let's go refactor it. So at this point, I think this particular dashboard is pretty much ready to go and share with the team. But for those of you on the call that maybe aren't experts in software, or to give you a feel of different data other than, let's say, something very software technical focused, I want to show you another dashboard that I've already made ahead of this call. And again, it's going to illustrate the power of relating multiple different data sets. And this is something that every company does, right? Performance reviews. So imagine a hypothetical team with 100 contributors. And on the left here, I have an interesting visual that lists all of the names and shows really a score across these different competency areas. So the greener, the stronger, right? And so, sure, you might look at this. This is actually an interesting visual in itself. And down here, you have averages. So you can see, for this hypothetical team, looks like they're pretty strong in analytical skills on average. So sure, you could do this. Of course, you could do this in Excel. What's the value? Well, let's look at the one on the right. On the right, we're bringing in data from a different data source. And this data is actually coming from our source control system, which tracks the actual contributions. And first of all, you can see how it looks. You can see like a relatively small portion of the engineers actually do most of the work. And so we can go look, for example, at our top performer. Looks like Michaela is doing a lot of contributions, and her performance review reflects that. So what's really nice about this is if you're an engineering manager or a CTO or a director, you can use this to really provide some cross-checks to your performance and even look for biases, right? Is your strongest contributor getting a good review? It looks like they are. I can go down here. Let's look at someone down at the bottom, somebody named Dulce. Dulce is rated below expectations on productivity, and it does look like the system reflects that score. So this kind of ability to explore data, I think, is also a very powerful KPI tool that you can use. Okay, so at this point, I think we have something pretty good. And this is where the next level of power comes in, which is this publish button up here. Now, just to save some time, I'll just show you the results of publish. In publish, what we can do is push it to the web, to the cloud, and then share it with only the folks we want. And I could show you the result of that. We've actually got this right on our webpage, and there is a sign-in that actually is a layer of security. But what we could see is that same dashboard that I was working on now shows up, and it's got the same level of interactivity. So imagine if this was your intranet, you could have this dashboard live. You could put this on TVs. You could really spread the word and get the whole team to rally behind a dashboard like this.
Right. And the big picture concept here is about making KPIs actionable. And the reason you want to do that is because it drives alignment. There's a great story that I read many years ago about Andy Hertzfeld. So Andy Hertzfeld was one of the chief software architects of the Apple Lisa, which is the precursor to the Mac. And someone at Apple had the bright idea back in 1982 to start tracking engineer productivity by counting the number of lines of code they wrote. I know some of you are smiling, but that's what they did. And so once a week, every engineer had to fill out a sheet that said how many lines they had written that week. And now Andy, maybe the most well-respected engineer at Apple, knew that this was pretty dumb. And certainly one week, it turns out, he spent a bunch of time fixing and refactoring some code in QuickDraw, vastly improving it. And so at the end of the week, on his weekly summary, he put negative 2,000 lines of code. And so, of course, Apple managers got the message, and they quietly discontinued the practice a few weeks later. And yes, 37 years later, with hindsight, we can laugh at such a dumb KPI, but the point here is that the metrics that people can't get behind just aren't useful. You can't impose KPIs on a team and expect those KPIs to automatically yield better results. Imposing KPIs does not work. And so you're going to need to iterate on things. And the way you iterate on things is by showing it to people, getting feedback, getting their thoughts, ideas. Does this work? Does this KPI accurately reflect what it is that you do day to day? Really close the loop on how your team thinks about the work they do. And the result of this is so powerful in terms of creating alignment for your team. And so that's our last kind of important KPI, we'll say, checkpoint. And so summarizing here, I think what we've talked about in the last 20 minutes, checklist goes like this: get the data all in one place. Now, a lot of people think that when I say get the data in one place, it means create some massive monolithic database, import a bunch of data, create a bunch of reports. Pretty soon, it's like a scene from Office Space. That's not what we're talking about. Well, modern tools that let you do this, you don't have to sort of create these monolithic databases. You can just sort of pull in from different sources. These modern tools will let you do that without actually having to recreate anything. So get the data in one place, super important. And then you're going to have lots of conversations about what the right metrics are that you should be tracking. And whatever metrics you find, number one, you need to balance those metrics. It's very easy to go off on the deep end and optimize one thing and sacrifice something else. Every metric that you think about tracking, you should think about what is the metric that sort of opposes that? What is the metric that counterbalances it in order to get that nice level? Your metrics need to be dollarized. It's the only way to compare different things that are sort of measured in different units. And dollars is a universal unit that everybody across the business can agree is important. And finally, as Paul said, make your metrics actionable. You want to create alignment by getting people to get behind your metrics. Make them theirs, right? That's how you create this alignment. And yeah, publish it, show it to people, and iterate. You're going to go through this a bunch of times before you get it exactly right. That's part of the process. I think this is pretty much the tail end of our presentation. I do want to summarize a little bit what we talked about. Number one, Paul, you want to go to the next slide?
Sure.
Number one, I think, look, this is just the tip of the iceberg. We spent 20 minutes on this. You can already see some of the power of these ideas, but there's a lot to this, and there's a lot to the art of designing good metrics. And there's lots of ways to do it right. And believe me, there's lots of ways to do it wrong. The almost 40 years of combined experience that Paul and I have doing this, I mean, we've made more than our share of mistakes, had some good successes too, but it is a process where you need to really think carefully about what it is that you're measuring and how you're measuring it. So want to close by saying, if you have ideas, if you have thoughts on how this can be used in your organization, feel free to contact us. You know how to reach us. And with that, love to open it to questions if anybody has any.